You're listening to the Study Podcast with Dr. Paul Wegner on the Old Testament historical books. I'm your host, Tyler Sanders, and I'm here with Dr. Paul Wegner. He's going to give us the Hebrew word of the day, and I have it on good authority that it's just one word. It's just one word this week, right?
And it's even one letter.
One letter.
Yeah, it's called a preposition, and in Hebrew, you actually tack it on to the beginning of the word.
Yeah.
So here we've got, and this one's kind of interesting. So it's in 2 Kings 17:17. Then they made their sons and their daughters pass through fire and practiced divination and enchantments and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord in order to provoke him. So it's what we want to look at is this preposition here. And it's either in order to provoke him or with the result to provoke him. And it makes a different nuance in it. We may never know for sure which one it is, but those are two of the most likely possibilities. So either they did this evil purposely to intentionally spite God, or they did it and then the result was it provoked God to anger. One of the two.
So there's a question of intent, basically.
Yes, yeah, and it's kind of interesting. I circled this preposition up here. It's basically the same one, but there it's on a verb. It's an infinitive, so it's really easy to know. It's just to do the evil. So that one's pretty clear. It's this second one it's a lot more complicated, and you've got to figure out which one it is. And I actually think it's probably intentional. I think they did it to spite him, especially somebody like Manasseh, who was so wicked. I think he intentionally did this.
Wow.
And so if so, that gives quite a different nuance to what these guys were doing, how wicked they were.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned Manasseh. Let's get a little recap of where we are. We've been going through 1st and 2nd Kings. Where are we now?
Okay. We just got done with the deportation of the northern kingdom off to Assyria. So basically what happened is Israel, the northern kingdom, is now pretty much gone. So instead of having, two nations that are in that land of Israel, now you've only got one because the northern kingdom is gone. And that means that Judah's got the Assyrians sitting basically on their northern border. Now, at that same time, both Jotham, who we're going to look at here, and Ahaz, and several of those kings, several of them were actually, like Ahaz paid tribute to Assyria so that they could actually use them to keep them safe against the northern kingdom of Israel. So basically, that's where we are. We've got the Assyria basically sitting on Israel's in Israel or Judah's northern border, and basically Judah paying off the Assyrians to keep them safe. Right. So now what we're going to do is we've got now about 150 years between 722, when the northern kingdom goes off into captivity, and now Judah will go off into the Babylonian captivity, and that's going to be 586 ultimately. That'll be the last one. And so that gives you about 150 years between these two time periods. So you know that Judah actually lasted longer, and I think the reason is because they had a couple good kings in here.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So we're going to look at one of them. Jotham was a good king, and he was basically in Judah. He's a good king. He walked in the ways of Uzziah. Notice it doesn't say in the ways of David. Remember, that's a hint to let you know how good he was. I would say Jotham was okay. He's not good enough to walk in the ways of David.
Puts him on the scale, though.
Yeah, it's going to keep it. Part of the reason he didn't get like David is because he kept those high places intact.
Right.
He didn't take those down. In fact, 2 Kings tells us he did what was right in the sight of the Lord. He did all according to his father Uzziah had done. But then it goes on to say he didn't take away the high places. Now, remember, those high places were where they worship Baal and stuff like that.
Right.
So you can understand why he got a little angry at them, because that was them compromising who they were going to serve.
Right.
Okay, so during Jotham's time, and Jotham and Ahaz are going to overlap we think that they have a co-rulership for a while. So you don't hear much about Jotham, but you hear a lot about Ahaz in the biblical text. But we're pretty sure that they overlap for,
Interesting.
we don't know, maybe up to 15 years. So
Wow.
yeah. So okay, so Pekah, the northern kingdom, and Rezin, the king of Syria, both come together against Judah, and this is what's called the Syro-Ephraimite War. It happened in about 734 to 732. Now that's 10 years before the northern kingdom's taken off, right? So in the biblical text, what happens is it keeps going back and forth.
Right.
And what's happened here, it's not in chronological order. So it's going to come back at a time before the northern kingdom is taken off into captivity. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So here's Jotham. It says in 2 Kings 15:37, in those days the Lord began to send Rezin, king of Aram, and that's another name for Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, against Judah. Now, that's funny that Pekah, the son of Remaliah, in the King's passage, or in the Isaiah passage, he's actually, Isaiah 7, he's actually mentioned 3 times. And every time he's mentioned the son of Remaliah. And part of it is like a jab. He's not supposed to be there. He's a usurper to the throne. So when it says Pekah, the son of Remaliah, that's like a jab each time.
Yeah.
So
who should have been king, basically.
That's right. Yeah. So at least he shouldn't have been.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So Ahaz now is going to be the next king after Jotham. And remember, I told you, Jotham doesn't say much about him in the biblical text. And I think it's because he overlaps so much with Ahaz. Okay. He reigns for 16 years in Judah. He did evil. It even says he passed his sons through fire. So that's basically child sacrifice. Yeah. Here's what it says in 2 Kings. But he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel and made his sons pass through the fire, according to the abominations of the nations whom the Lord had driven out before the sons of Israel. I don't know if you remember, but remember at one point God says that Abraham can't kick the people out of Canaan, but later when they come back, the Israelites come back, they do, and so I assumed it was time. But what this is saying is part of the reason they are kicked out is because it says in the Genesis passage is the sin of the Amorites was not yet complete. So Abraham wasn't able to kick them out because they hadn't got to the full level of sin. Well, now it's saying, and I assume that means when the Israelites come in, they can kick them out because they've now gotten to the level where God can punish them.
Yeah.
But what I think is interesting here, it looks like to me now Israel has got to the point where they are so wicked that they're doing the same kind of things that the kings of Israel who lived there before them were doing.
Yeah.
So that gives you a hint that's saying, well, it's probably getting pretty close to the time that God's going to punish them too.
Right.
Yeah. Right. All right. He sacrificed and burned incense on every high place and on the hills and under every green tree. So pretty much know that they're worshiping Baal now, and that's pretty much an abomination to God.
Yeah.
It says at that time, Rezin, king of Aram, recovered Elath for Aram and cleared the Judeans out of Elath entirely. And the Arameans came to Elath and have lived there to this day. It's clear down on the Red Sea there. So basically that means they have now taken over their major port. So Judah is now in really big trouble. One of their major ports on the Red Sea is taken over by Israel and Syria. So that lets you know this is a pretty serious time for Israel, for Judah, because they're
pretty well surrounded.
Yeah, they are, and it's a real dangerous time for them.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the next one. Okay, now Hezekiah is going to be after Ahaz. Ahaz, remember, is a bad king, but Hezekiah is another good king. He reigns for 29 years, and he apparently overlaps with the king ahead of him. So he says he walks in the way of David, So that actually gives you some clue as to how good he was. He wiped out the high places and cleansed the land. So that's really good news.
Yeah.
All right. Did not submit to Assyria. Watched it as he watched Israel pretty much be defeated. Okay. And then during his time in 701, the Assyrians came in and basically, it's interesting. The 701 situation is covered in chapter 18 through 20 of the book of Kings. And it's pretty clear. Hezekiah actually pays Sennacherib off at first and sends him money. Let me make sure. Let's get to the date for it. Verse 13 of chapter 18 says, "Now in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and seized them." So now remember, Assyria is a really, really strong nation at this time. Judah is just not got a chance against them. They were really worried. So it makes sense that Hezekiah would actually pay him off. Verse 15 says, Hezekiah gave him all the silver which was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasuries of the king's house. At that time, Hezekiah cut off the gold from the doors of the temple of the Lord and from the doorposts which Hezekiah, king of Judah, had overlaid. It gave it to the king of Assyria. So they pay, I have no idea how much gold was on those doorposts, but that's a lot of tribute for them.
Yeah.
And you would have thought that would have appeased the Assyrians. And I assume, at least initially, it did, because then they actually have a fight against the Egyptians, because Hezekiah called on the Egyptians to help them. That probably just made Sennacherib even madder. So then it probably comes and is probably going to try to wipe them out totally, is what I'm assuming. All right, here's some order. What you got? He comes to Jerusalem. His name is Rebshakeh, and that's probably more of a title than anything. It means the great ruler or something like that. So he's probably the commander of his army.
I see.
Yeah. And he comes first to try to discourage them and try to talk them into giving in.
Yeah.
Hezekiah, at least initially, does send money back with him the first time. But then when the Egyptians come and Sennacherib defeats the Egyptians, I assume what's going on is then now the Assyrians are really mad. So they're coming to totally wipe out them. So Hezekiah actually takes the letters that Sennacherib had sent to him and laid them out before God. Isaiah is sent with God's answer to give him that God will defeat the Sennacherib. So it's kind of neat. Here's where the prophet Isaiah now fits into the book of Kings. Mm-hmm. All right. And then Hezekiah after that, or sometime during that, actually, it's probably just before it, because Hezekiah gets an illness, and basically it looks like he's going to die, but he gets a message from God, and he heals him. So what happens is the Babylonians actually sent Merodach-Baladan to come and see him, or at least messengers from him to come and see him and say how happy they were that Hezekiah is alive and all that. That's when he shows them all the treasures that are in his house. And that's when God balls him out for that later, or Isaiah does later. Yeah.
Right.
All right. So that's how these two books kind of relate to each other.
Yeah, it's pretty cool to see that overlap.
Yeah. Now the next one is Manasseh. Manasseh is going to reign for 55 years. He is the worst, the most evil king in Israel. Yeah. It says he walks in the way of the Canaanites. That lets you. Let me read it for you. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, according to the abominations of the nations, whom the Lord dispossessed before the sons of Israel. For he rebuilt the high places, which Hezekiah's father had destroyed. He erected altars for Baal and made an Asherah, as Ahab, king of Israel, had done. Or Ahab, king of Israel, had done, and worshiped all the hosts of heaven and served them. God even sent messengers, prophets, to warn him. And Manasseh did not relent. This is kind of actually sad. If you think about it, Hezekiah was one of the best kings. his son is one of the worst kings,
Yeah.
most despicable. You know, and it's it's sad. It's hard to know what your children are going to do. Um, it just seems really sad to me for Hezekiah to have a son like Manasseh,
Yeah.
who is just so wicked. It even says Manasseh has shed much innocent blood, and possibly even Isaiah. There's something called the martyrdom of Isaiah that actually claims Manasseh did it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's an apocryphal story, but
Yeah.
some parts might be true.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. The book of Chronicles says that he was taken to Assyria and then repented, and thus God let him come back.
Yeah.
So one of the most wicked kings in Chronicles, you hear that he actually comes back,
Right.
and it makes it. That's why in the apocryphal books you'll probably hear something called the Prayer of Manasseh.
Hmm.
I think the Jewish people realize, man, to have such a wicked king that then God forgives and lets him come
Yeah.
back, that prayer must have really been something. So I assume
Sure.
they made it up, there's something called the Prayer of Manasseh, and talks about his
Interesting.
repentance and all that. It's something.
Well, and it's an interesting idea that to see God's punishment working, I think,
Yeah,
because that would have been the point of sending them to Syria anyway. It's to,
yeah,
shape up a little bit,
yeah.
shape up a lot.
Yeah, I think what else it tells us, though, that when there is really true repentance, God actually really does forgive. And that's probably why that part of the story is in there, is to let
Yeah.
them know that God does, when people truly repent, he's a very gracious God.
Right.
So I think that's helpful.
Hmm.
Verse 10 says, Now the Lord spoke through his prophets, his servants, the prophets, saying, Because Manasseh, king of Judah, has done these abominations, having done wickedly more than all the Amorites who were before him, and has also made Judah sin with his idols. Therefore, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, Behold, I am bringing much calamity on Jerusalem and Judah, that whoever hears it, both his ears will tingle. I will stretch over Jerusalem the line of Samaria and the plummet of the house of Ahab, and I will wipe Jerusalem as one wipes a dish, wiping it and turning it upside down. I will abandon the remnant of my inheritance and deliver them into the hand of their enemies, and they will become as plunder and spoil to all their enemies.
Wow.
Yeah. So
There's a couple big things in there.
yeah, what is interesting, notice it says, because Manasseh led them so far into wickedness, it sounds like there's a point of no return. So God
Yeah.
has to punish. So even though Manasseh actually repents and comes back and gets spared, it looks like now he's started the ball rolling, that the wickedness has gotten so bad in Israel or in
Yeah.
Judah that now he's got to punish them. Yeah.
Well, and it's fascinating to see the remnant mentioned here. That was such a big theme in Isaiah that we looked at, that a
That's
remnant
right.
is going to be protected and
Yeah.
like they're going to survive, and that's what's going to be like the
Yeah.
basis of the holy people basically. And here it's
Yeah.
it's that serious. It's an abandonment of that.
Yeah. Remember, God does still spare them. So he's going to, in fact, Jeremiah actually talks about good fruit and good figs and bad figs. He says the bad figs are going to be carried off into to exile. But
Yeah.
he also says that the good figs are going to come out of exile and come back. So
Mm.
he's actually telling us that good figs are still there. So he's still protecting that remnant, even though at this point he says they're going to go into captivity and they're going to,
Yeah.
be plundered.
So here's my question. When it says in verse, let's see, that's 12, whoever hears of it, both his ears will tingle.
Yeah.
That's an interesting image. What does
Yeah.
that mean exactly?
I think it means I think it means that when sometimes you're told some things that just stun you, and
Mm.
he's picturing it as it's so stunning that your ears are going to tingle because they've heard something. They can't believe they've heard it. It's something that you can't believe you hear, and it almost is causing them to I don't know if it's hurt or just
react in some kind of way.
yeah, in a way
Yeah.
that you wouldn't expect.
Yeah.
That's that.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's one of, in my mind, that's one of the neatest images of that somebody can hear something that's so bad that your ears are gonna tingle. It's gonna
Like
almost
physically
hurt like
react
them.
to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I also thought it's kind of neat. He says he's going to wipe Jerusalem as one wipes a dish, wiping
Yeah.
it and then turning it upside down.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So
That's a very rich image as well.
yeah.
Because you don't just wipe a dish for no reason. You're cleaning it,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think
and
that's the
it's
image.
clean whenever all of the food and stain, all of it's gone,
Yeah. Yeah. And isn't that a
So
good picture of what the
yeah,
exile did?
yeah,
It basically cleaned it all off so they could start afresh.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's kind of neat.
It's a very, very powerful image.
Yeah, I have a map here that shows you from Jerusalem heading over to Babylon. Now that's about 700 miles. So they're taking and most of the people did not actually go to Babylon itself. It tells us that they went to places that were ruined cities, basically to towns, and then they built them up. But
Yeah,
but being taken 700 miles away from where your home is, you can see why that's a real, almost like not only embarrassment because your God couldn't protect you,
mm.
but also it's going to sever those roots and everything that you
Yeah,
hold dear. You can see how that would disorientate people.
completely.
So
Yeah,
yeah, so
yeah. That's a very long way.
yeah. All right, so that's the way up. Now we're going to have a king that is an evil king, but he only reigns for 2 years. So he's the son of Manasseh. It says he's very evil. He walked in the ways of Manasseh,
Yeah,
Baal, Asherah, and others things that he did. His own servants actually end up killing him. Yeah, but the people of the land then put Josiah on the throne. So apparently, well, here's the verse. He did evil in the sight of the Lord as Manasseh his father had done. For he walked in all the ways that his father had walked and served the idols that his father had served and worshiped them. For he forsook the Lord, the God of his fathers, and did not walk in the way of the Lord. Now, somehow we've got to come, how does Chronicles fit into what it says here? And so
yeah.
it Chronicles makes it very clear that he goes off into captivity for the punishment, but when he's in captivity, he actually repents. So God delivers
Oh
him.
wow.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So it's kind of a neat thing.
Yeah,
All right, now we've got Josiah. Of the two kings in Israel that are in Judah that are really good, I would say that Hezekiah is one, and I kind of put him a little above Josiah, but Josiah is the other one. Josiah is going to start when he's like 8 years old or 9 years old. He's very young, and it's during his reign. Oh, it says that he's a good king and he walks in the ways of David. So that's how you know he's a very good king. He
yeah,
restores the temple. Now, remember, during Manasseh's time, remember it's 55 years, and
yeah.
basically in 55 years, apparently the temple was basically destroyed almost. And
Mm.
so during Josiah's time, they had to rebuild it and get it functioning again because it was almost stopped functioning.
Yeah,
And while they were doing that, they found the book of the Lord, and
yeah,
and my guess is they found when they say the book of the law that was found there. My guess it's at least Genesis to Deuteronomy,
yeah,
at least that. But it could be a phrase that refers to any of the other books that had
mm.
been associated with it by that time. So it's hard to know exactly what it was, but I would assume it's at least the Pentateuch.
Yeah,
Okay. It says, Then Hilkiah the priest said to Shaphan the scribe, I have found the book of the law in the house of the Lord. And Hilkiah gave the book to Shaphan to read it. Moreover, Shaphan the scribe told the king, saying, Hilkiah the priest has given me a book. And Shaphan read it in the presence of the king. When the king heard the words of the book of the law, he tore his clothes and then started doing the rebuilding stuff.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that's why I put him. Him and Hezekiah are both said to be following in the ways of David. So they're both good. Josiah, by that time, the nation had gone so far that was almost past the point of no return.
Yeah.
And I think that's why. So Josiah did everything he could. He did reforms and stuff like that. But one of the passages really clear. He actually had to give the sacrifices to the people that made them. And I'm going, man, when you do that, it kind of takes away. So it seems like to me it's not going to be a very heartfelt reform. They'll probably reform because the king makes them, but it's not going to last very long if he's having to pay for the sacrifices and giving them to him, and then they offer them.
Right.
So it didn't have much effect from what I can tell.
Yeah.
All right. It says Josiah made a covenant and he did some reforms. Verse 3 says, the king stood by the pillar and made a covenant before the Lord to walk after the Lord and to keep his commandments and his testimonies and his statutes with all his heart and all his soul, to carry out the words of the covenant that were written in this book. And all the people entered into this covenant. So there's that. They made this covenant. Okay. But remember, Jerusalem still needs to be punished. And actually, Josiah, he actually gets killed. It's kind of a funny story. Well, sad story. The king of Egypt, Necho is his name, is heading up to help the Assyrians fight off the Babylonians in 709. And in actual fact, what happens is Josiah tries to stop him at Megiddo. And instead of stopping him, he actually gets killed. So in 609, one of the major events is Josiah gets killed so that Egypt can go up and still help Assyria. Now, it didn't do any good because the Assyrians still got defeated. But we lost Josiah, a very good king. And he was probably still very young because he started so young.
He started out so young.
Yeah. Here's what it says. However, the Lord did not turn from the fierceness of his great wrath, with his great anger burned against Judah, because of all the provocations which Manasseh had provoked him. The Lord said, I will remove Judah from my sight. I'm sorry. Do you see when it says with all the provocations that Manasseh had provoked him? See, that's where I got that. I think it was purposeful. Remember we talked about that Hiphil form that with the infinitive or with a preposition on it. It's this kind of wording that suggests to me that he actually intentionally did this despite God. Yeah. All right. Verse 27, the Lord said, I will remove Judah from my sight. And as I have removed Israel, I will cast off Jerusalem, this city which I have chosen, and the temple which I said my name shall be there. That's actually kind of interesting, right? Because the whole purpose for God using Israel to be a light to the other nations and also to have a temple where God dwelt was to show the other nations that there was a God in Israel that was amazing and that he could protect Jerusalem and stuff like that. So when Jerusalem and the temple get destroyed, that was like a slap in God's face. But he must have thought it was worth it because the nation needed punishment so badly.
Yeah.
So in my mind, that's a really interesting thing. Here's the wickedness of Israel or Judah that needed to be punished, but that meant that God's honor was also going to be attacked and destroyed. So my guess is that when the people came back, and remember the promises that Isaiah gave and all that they would come back.
Oh yeah.
In my mind, that was a vindication that this God actually could protect them. So although as you can tell, it would probably take faith because the people who are looking at this are probably going, "Oh man, what kind of a God is that?" But then when they come back, they're probably thinking, "Well, maybe this God can actually protect this people."
Well, and that took a long time too.
It's kind of interesting. All right, we got a few more. Okay, when Josiah is on the throne, he gets killed in 609, and that's when the Egyptian pharaoh Necho goes up to Haran
to help Assyria.
The battle must have lasted about 3 months because in 3 months he comes back and he takes Jehoahaz off the throne. The people had put Jehoahaz on. He was actually one of the sons of Josiah. He puts him on. They put him on the throne. Pharaoh comes through, takes him off, and punishes the people and then sends him to Egypt and puts him in prison. Verse 33 says this: Pharaoh Necho imprisoned him at Riblah in the land of Hamath, that he might not reign in Jerusalem. And he imposed on the land a fine of 100 talents of silver. Now, a talent is about 70 pounds.
Wow.
So that now, and a talent of gold. So just, silver wasn't as expensive, but gold was, and 70 pounds of gold is going to be a lot.
Yeah.
Anyway, Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim, the son of Josiah, king in the place of Josiah his father, and changed his name to Jehoiakim, but took Jehoahaz away and brought him to Egypt, and he died there. So he was only on the throne for 3 months, and Pharaoh Necho takes him back off and takes him down to Egypt. Now, towards the end, you're going to see several kings that only last like 3 months, and that must be because it took, like in Pharaoh's case, it took about 3 months to do the battle and then come back and take him off. The next one's going to be a similar kind of thing. Yeah. Okay, so that's Jehoahaz. The next one's Jehoiakim, okay, and he reigns 11 years. Okay, that's the one that Pharaoh Necho put on. He made him king, Eliakim, the son of Josiah, and changed his name. So his name was Eliakim, means God is, or God establishes, or something like that. Jehoiakim means Jehovah establishes. So it's a similar name, real close, not very much difference between them.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, and then Necho charged the tax on Judah. Jehoiakim was an evil king. He walked in the ways of his father, and Nebuchadnezzar by that time controlled most of the land, probably because when Egypt and the Assyrians got defeated, the Babylonians basically took over the control of it. Even though he didn't do a whole lot against them, he still kept control of it. And that was basically in 605. It says the Lord sent against him bands of Chaldeans, bands of Arameans, and bands of Moabites, and the bands of the Ammonites. So he sent them against Judah to destroy it. And according to the word of the Lord, which he had spoken through his servants, the prophets, surely at the command of the Lord it has come upon Judah to remove them from his sight because of the sins of Manasseh, according to all that he had done. So those summary verses kind of give us a clue as to what God's thinking about the wickedness of Manasseh. Yeah. So this is kind of, I'm trying to show you this as this is a downhill spiral. So after Josiah, the kings on the throne are basically all wicked, and it's just going to go downhill really fast. Now, some of them
weaker,
last 11 years, but some of them only last 3 months too. Yeah. All right. Jehoiakim reigned for 3 months in Judah. He did evil like his fathers. Nebuchadnezzar came to Jerusalem, came to punish his father, but his father died. This is a funny story. So it's Jehoiakim rebels against the Babylonians, or at least he didn't seem like he was on their side. And so Nebuchadnezzar comes down. What he does is it doesn't pay the tribute. So that means he's getting ready to rebel against the Babylonians, and then he dies. And he he didn't die in a battle, so obviously it was natural causes. But then he puts his throne on his son on the throne, and in 3 months, the Pharaoh Necho, this one is Nebuchadnezzar, is standing outside his door saying, "Okay, you guys, you rebelled against me. It's time to destroy you." And so this guy had, as far as we know, he didn't really do anything, but his father had, and so he suffers the consequences.
Yeah.
And then Nebuchadnezzar deports Jehoiachin to Babylon, and Mattaniah is put on the throne. Now, Mattaniah's name is changed again to Zedekiah. So that's why the last one on the throne is basically going to be Zedekiah. Okay, and he'll reign for about 11 years. Here's what it says. Then he led away into exile. This is what's usually called the second deportation. The first deportation is 605, and Daniel goes in that one. Remember Daniel and his friends?
Yeah.
so Daniel and his friends go away, and the first one wasn't really a destruction or anything like that. It just Nebuchadnezzar came there, tells them that I'm the new one that controls this area. Start paying tribute to me, and then he takes some of their best people to be
Right.
rulers in Babylon.
Yeah.
So Daniel actually has he's being taken away so that he can be a ruler in the Babylonian nation. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. Okay. That's the first deportation, 605. The second one was when Jehoiakim rebels against Nebuchadnezzar. He
Yeah.
comes down, and this time he's a little ticked. Okay,
Yeah.
so
This is
here's
more
what it says: He
punitive.
led away into exile all of Jerusalem and all the captains and all the mighty men of valor, 10,000 captives and all the craftsmen and smiths. None remained except the poorest people of the land. So he led Jehoiachin away into exile into Babylon. Also, the king's mother and the king's wives and his officials and the leading men of the land, they led him away into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. So the second one, and in fact, the second one sounds like it's the biggest one, but in actual fact, it's
Right.
not.
Hmm.
My guess later on when we look at the second one or the last one, it's going to look like there's fewer people taken off, but I think that's because more people were killed. So,
Mm.
so this is the second stage. In the Babylonians had three stages in there for nations that rebelled against them. The first stage is they come and just declare them to be the new ruler, and they have to pay tribute and stuff like that. If you rebel, then the second one is they come and take away all the leaders in the nation.
Yeah.
And you saw this. They not only took away the king and his family, but they took craftsmen and smiths and all the people that kind of hold society together. They're the ones
Sure.
that
Yeah.
can create wealth. Actually, well, they're all taken off too. So it says they had 10,000 captives. So that's a lot from that little nation. All right, and took them to Babylon. So
Yep.
so this is that second deportation, and it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, here's our last one. Zedekiah is the last king on the throne of Judah. He reigns 11 years, and it says he did evil like Jehoiakim. So that gives you some clue how bad he was.
Yep.
And then Nebuchadnezzar came to Jerusalem again. This is 586. Apparently Zedekiah quit paying tribute, and Nebuchadnezzar comes back to do the final punishment.
Wow.
It's interesting. Nebuchadnezzar was pretty kind to people. I mean, you saw the first one. First time he comes, he was pretty kind, just to show him that he was the new ruler and stuff like that. But if you rebelled, before long, he had 3 steps, and the second step was already done now for Judah.
Yeah.
And the last one is total wipe them out. Verse 2 Kings 25:1 gives you some clue of that. It says, now in the 9th year of his reign, so remember I told you he reigns for 11 years. That means that this battle or this capture is going to take 2 years to do. And remember how the Babylonians usually did it? They surrounded the city and then just kind of starved them out.
Right.
What they didn't know about, if you don't have water, it takes probably 3 days before you die.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
but Jerusalem is actually different than that. They've actually got a good spring that constantly keeps water for them. You've heard of it, the Gihon Springs or the
Yeah.
Pool of Siloam. Yeah, so they have that. So it would take much longer. Now they have to run out of food, and that's going to take several years before they actually run out of food. And by the end, they're starving is the reason they actually want to give up. But if you think about it, that's a brilliant way to capture a nation. If you do
Sure.
it that
Right.
way, you basically don't even have to lose any men.
Right.
You just starve them out, and before long, they're willing to come out, and you don't even have to fire a shot really, because they're pretty
Right. Or
much
like
giving
destroy
in.
the city.
But here's what it says. So Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came, he and his army, against Jerusalem and camped against it and built a siege wall all around it. That was another thing they did to keep all the people in a siege wall. So the city was under siege until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. On the 9th day of the 4th month of the famine was so severe in the city that there was no food for the people of the land. When the city was broken into, and all the men of war fled by night by the way of the gate between the two walls between the king's garden. Though the Chaldeans were all around the city, they went by the way of the Arabah. So apparently what happened is the Babylonians had broken down the first wall. Jerusalem apparently has two walls around it. They have an outer wall and then one around the palace. So my guess, before they got to the palace wall, Zedekiah and his men took off. And the Arabah is down by Jericho, and they headed down towards Jericho and then headed north, and it's in the in that area of the Jordan River where they got caught, and finally Nebuchadnezzar punished them.
Yeah.
Well, so that's how basically the history ends.
That's the end of the Kings.
588, the Nebuchadnezzar built a siege wall around the city. By 586, the famine was so severe that they actually were giving up. Zedekiah and his men fled. They fled through the Arabah, it's called, and they were captured in the plains of the Jericho. So that's when it says the plains of Jericho, that would be in the Dead Sea area in there. Yeah. And then Zedekiah and his sons were killed. Basically, he killed his sons in his presence, and then blinded him, burned his eyes apparently, or I'm not sure how he did it, but he blinded him. And then Jerusalem was burned. So that's basically how the story ends. If you asked me what would be the most important passages that talk about the fall of Jerusalem, this would be one, 2 Kings 25, but your other one would be in Jeremiah. The very last chapter of Jeremiah is also a very thorough description of what happened at that time. Yeah. So both of those are pretty good.
Yeah.
All right. Here's the last part of chapter 25. I call it a historical prologue because, or appendix, because it's kind of put on there after you've got the destruction. What else do you need to talk about? But what Nebuchadnezzar did is he put Gedaliah as governor. And now notice it's not in Jerusalem. It's at Mizpah. Jerusalem was destroyed, so there was basically no way he could rule from there. So Mizpah is further north of there, and it was one of their fortified cities, and it must not have been totally destroyed. Sennacherib says that he wiped out like 48 of their strong cities. Well, that means that time the Assyrians, they did quite a thorough destruction. But when Babylon came, apparently most of the destruction was in Jerusalem itself, at least from what we can tell. Okay. I'm sure they captured cities on the way up to Jerusalem, but the main destruction at the very end was Jerusalem itself. And then he puts Gedaliah there, but then Ishmael, the son of Nethaniah, went and killed Gedaliah, and then they were so afraid that Nebuchadnezzar was going to come and punish them for that they fled to Egypt, and they took Jeremiah, the prophet, with them. And even though Jeremiah told them, if you go there, you're going to be killed, and I don't want to go with you, but he was forced to go. Here's what it says in verse 25. It came about in the 7th month that Ishmael, the son of Nethaniah, the son of Elishma, of the royal family, came with 10 men and struck Gedaliah down, so that he died along with the Jews and the Chaldeans who were with him at Mizpah. So I don't know, if I was you and I was living at that time, and here's this guy, Ishmael, who comes and wipes out the guy that Nebuchadnezzar had put on the throne, I would be afraid too that he's going to come and have all kind of serious repercussions. So I can see why they fled and went to Egypt. So we're almost done. So that the last thing we hear in this last part of chapter 25, is that about 562, it says that Evil Merodach, the king of Babylon, let Jehoiakim go free, and he ate regularly with the king of Babylon the rest of his life at his table. Here's how it says it. Now it came about in the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 27th day of the month, that evil Merodach, king of Babylon, in the year that he became king, released Jehoiachin, king of Judah, from prison. And he spoke kindly to him and set his throne above the thrones of the kings who were with him in Babylon. And Jehoiachin changed his prison clothes and had his meals in the king's presence regularly all the days of his life. So it's kind of interesting. That's kind of how the book basically ends.
Yeah.
I just got a summary here, and then we can talk. It says, as the kings went, so went the nations. If the king was wicked, the nation went further into sin. If the king was righteous, they went more towards righteousness. Do you remember that at the very beginning, like when Samuel, when the nation wanted a king, God actually told them that that's the way it was going to be, is that the kings were going to take over their field, the best of their fields, give a tenth of their money, their sons and daughters and stuff like that. So God made it clear that there was going to be a significant punishment by getting a king. And now you can actually see why a king was so important to what was going to happen in the nation. And then at some point, the nation is destined for punishment. And no matter what the king does, it's too late to bring the nation back. And you saw that after Manasseh's time.
Yeah.
And then kingship was no longer a possibility following the return from Babylon, for the nation was always ruled from then on by other nations. So, in fact, from about Isaiah's time on, the nation of Israel or Judah basically had other people ruling them, so they really didn't have a king until because either the Romans or the Persians or whoever. All right, here's my conclusions. God kept his promise that David would have a son to sit on the throne, and we saw most of that pretty much through there. Jesus picked up that promise and carries it on forever, I think. That's why that when he says to David that your sons are going to sit on the throne forever, Olam, I think it's because Jesus picks that up and carries it on forever. Number two, even though during good kings of Hezekiah's reign, the Assyrians came and tried to capture Jerusalem, but God actually stopped them in 701 and actually didn't let them take Jerusalem, and so it was actually a protection at that point. And then number three, during the time of Joash, the line of David got down to only one son, but God protected that son and kept his promise. I think that's a neat time in Israel's history.
Yeah.
And then number four, kings had a lot of power to lead the nation in the way that it should go, or vice versa. And the problem was that a good share of them led them in the wrong direction.
Yeah, right.
Well, that's it, but I got some questions for you.
Hit me with the questions.
What is the purpose for this history of the kings?
Yeah, just start off with a big question. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, I think this has to do with that kind of question of whether or not Israel needed a king ever, that they had a king in God, and that they said, no, that's not really good enough. We want a king. We want someone here who can be a king like other nations have kings. And so I think that's at least part of this kind of narrative, is just seeing that initial disobedience, where that's going to end them.
Okay.
And it's pretty rough. I mean, they end up with nothing really.
Yeah, that's good. I also think it shows a lot about God's mercy and his kindness, that he keeps coming and sending his prophets and all that.
Yeah.
And still they still don't come back to God. Yeah. So I think you learn a lot about God during this time period, but you also learned a lot about their own wickedness, don't you? It just kept going down and down and down.
Yeah, and there's some really interesting bits in there, like some of the evil kings repent.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating detail. I mean, even just the fact that from time to time they still had good kings.
Yeah.
Is in some way a mercy from God.
Good. Well, that goes into that second question: is what do we learn
Yeah.
about God in this history?
Yeah, well, it's the same thing we have a challenge answering right now, is that in God there is great mercy as well as justice.
Yeah,
And we don't always totally understand how that's going to work out. But we know that um, in his power and his providence, he acts justly and still acts mercifully.
yeah, yeah. Okay. What else? What else? I think it also shows that God's got a plan. You know,
True. Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
even Manasseh didn't thwart God's plan. He still had that
Yeah.
plan that was, and he can bring those Babylonians or the Assyrians at the exact time he needs to. And I
Yeah.
think it's also very fair that the Assyrians take the northern kingdom off, well, 150 years before Judah, because there was no doubt Israel was a lot more wicked than the southern kingdom.
Mm.
So I think
Yeah.
it was, and I guess then you've got these good kings popping in ever since, once Israel gets taken off, you've got several good kings in Judah that actually
Sure.
help extend that time some.
Yeah.
So I think that was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And then he makes it very clear at the end why God was going to punish them is once they got to the point of no return, even when you had good kings, it didn't bring the nation back. So
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
yeah, number 3 was God correct about the cost of kingship for the nation of Israel?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's more than just like, was he correct? I mean, he caused this, this is his, just like you said, it's part of his plan, but it's part of his corrective measure, to demonstrate this. And, I think if you look at kind of maybe the big picture of salvation history, you can kind of see how all this fits in too, and that this failure does help set up, the later success of Christ.
Yeah.
Good.
Good. Oh, number 4. How did we know that the king was really good or really bad?
Yeah, well, it kind of depends who they're connected to, right?
Yeah.
Are you like David, or are you not like David? Are you like your own father, perhaps, or some, whoever else was like the most recent terrible king?
Yeah.
And it seemed like a lot of times the defining factor was whether or not the king was going to lead the people to reject worship of other gods. That's a big part of this.
That was. Yeah.
And it must have been quite an extensive problem because every king deals with it.
Yeah.
Not a single one of them actually solves it. You know?
That's true.
Even the good ones, they don't really knock it out completely.
Yeah. Yeah. Sin has a way of coming back in, doesn't it? Each time.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we made it. We made it.
That's fantastic.
We made it
all the way
book.
through Kings.
And it was a huge area. Now we've got Chronicles that I'm going to talk about next. And I'm not going to go over all the details, but I do want to show how Chronicles is a different type of literature and for a totally different purpose for a different time.
Yeah.
So I think
I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
So we'll get into some genre stuff. We'll get into some history.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be really good. Do you think you'll approach it the same kind of way? We'll put First, Second Chronicles together and kind of just approach it as one big piece.
Yeah, I think I'm going to do that, and we will go through highlighting certain things. But now that we've got the main core of history out of the way, we can now see where the things are different and why. So
that's perfect.
Yeah,
that sounds very good to me. I'm looking forward to that.
Oh yeah, I'm excited. So I think hopefully we'll be ready for it.
Yeah, we will.
All right.
Okay, I'll see you next time,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Wegner.
Bye-bye.